Senator Binns, good day to you, my lady.
Good day to you, Reverend Faith. How are you?
I'm so glad to have you, Sophia. I'm well, thank you. Senator Sophia Frazer-Binns is an attorney, and she's the Shadow Minister of Land, Environment, and Climate Change. Sophie, what should Jamaica expect? What do you expect from this very well publicized and hugely attended COP26 conference in Glasgow? Is there anything in there for us, you think?
Well, in one word, I would expect a recommitment to the protection of the environment. You're quite correct when you said that it has been very publicized, and perhaps even more publicized than COP16 in Paris. But I think it has been so publicized because there has been an increased awareness by persons on the importance of protecting the environment, the importance of restoration, and the importance of adaptation. For us locally, I think perhaps more than ever before, there has been a coming together of all the different stakeholders in a recognition that we must come together to protect Jamaica, and particularly because we're a small island developing state, we have to do what we must to ensure that we can adapt and we can survive. And I'm hopeful that coming out of all of this and all the discussions that have taken place and all the commitments that have been given, that Jamaica will play its part with a recommitment to the protection of the environment.
From the standpoint of the People's National Party, what is it that we should be doing? Sophia Frazer-Binns, this station and this program is particularly geared and beamed to Jamaican lovers in the diaspora, and they're scratching their heads and wondering, Jamaica's so beautiful, Jamaica seems so pristine, especially when looked at from abroad. What is it that you think we ought to be doing that we're not doing?
Well, certainly to start, we have got to relook at the leadership of the country, because you know that leadership drives actions. And so leadership in terms of the protection of the environment has got to be unequivocal in what we say, unequivocal in what we do. And that will set the tone to say we as a nation are serious about it. And when Jamaicans see the leaders getting in line and showing the commitment, not just by words but by actions, then I believe that they too will also fall in line. But in addition to the leadership, I think what is missing in our environmental advocacy is just sharing of information, and information that is set in a way that everybody, the man on the JUTC bus can understand, the man down in St. Thomas on his farm can understand, as well as the person up in Cherry Gardens. What we have found is that when we talk about the environment and climate change, that the discussion has been so academic, so scientific, which we ought to be, it ought to be scientific, but it's so academic that the regular Joe can't really understand it. And so what we have got to do to get the buy-in and to get people to become more conscious is that we have to break the information down in a way that everybody understands. But also, we also have to let them understand that climate change has a direct impact on you, on your livelihood, on your family, on your own existence. And if we can do that, then I think we'll start something really good.
There are three things, and very practical ones, that I'd like to put to you and get your position and that of the People's National Party. How can we talk about being serious about climate change, about mitigation of pollution, when we continue to dump most of our garbage in the sea, ma'am?
Yes, and that is something that, first of all, the issue of waste disposal is something that I think as a country we have got to take on head on. We have been tinkering for too long with waste disposal and what it means and how we should deal with it. The issue of separation at source has got to be done. You know, in countries such as the United Kingdom, it is something that is done. And if you do breach that, then there's a penalty. So we have got to start with waste disposal, and the government, whoever the government is of the day, has a role to play to ensure that the resources are provided for that purpose. The second thing as well is our collection. Listen, you hear stories in the media day in, day out about garbage not being collected for weeks. Persons are forced, it's certainly not a justification, but persons are forced to dispose of their garbage in other ways. And thirdly, the anti-litter law. For years, more than a decade, we've been talking about the anti-litter law, and we have not done anything at all to give force to that, to give it some teeth. And so these are some of the practical things that we have to do. And education. I can't overemphasize the importance of educating. Educating. We have got to do that.
We supposedly pay for waste disposal from land taxes, property taxes,
Yes.
and we continue to collect taxes based on the unimproved value of land, when in fact the improvements bring about usually a greater quantity of waste and a greater pressure on the system. Would the People's
Yes.
National Party consider changing that so that we would have adequate funds to do garbage disposal, and in fact to let those who waste most, have most to dispose of, pay for it more than they do now?
I think it is a proposal that we ought to pay some attention to, do some research around it. And one of the benefits, if there ever is a benefit of being in opposition, is that it presents an opportunity for us to do research, for us to adapt best practices, and to have policy positions so that when we become the government, we're able to implement. And I think that is one of the things that has a lot of merit, and we certainly should look into.
Second thing that I'd like to ask you, same questions about, is what about squatting? Because one of the greatest sources of environmental degradation is the fact that people settle on land anywhere, riverbank, gully corner, impossibly hillsides, and everybody says this is coming to an end, but it's not. It's increasing as economic conditions deteriorate, and as there is an absence of alternative for the majority of our people. How would our party, the People's National Party, how would it deal with that?
Well, you're correct about squatting, and you can't divorce the conversation of squatting with climate change and the environmental protection, because you're quite correct that a significant percentage of a person they squat in disaster-prone areas. We're talking about our coastal communities, and they're the ones who are most impacted when we have natural disasters. Certainly, from where we stand in the PNP, it is something that we have. It is a sore that we have got to deal with. I like to use the word tinkering approach has not worked, and it cannot work because increasingly more and more persons are squatting. So what we have to do is to take a radical approach to this. I start, for example, that one of the things that we have got to do, more than 50% of squatters squat on government land. Yes? And so one of the things we've got to do is we've got to look back and see how can we use some of the Crown land, because as you know, the Crown is the largest landowner. How can we use some of these Crown lands and assist persons in having formal settlements? It may require infrastructural development, it may require relocation, but I think that the government ought to start with itself by utilizing Crown land. The other thing as well is that we have got to find a way to either utilize the existing laws or develop new and far-reaching and modern laws to help persons to get titles to their property, because too many persons continue to live in areas that have been living in for many years and still have not been able to obtain titles. And notwithstanding what the NLA has done in the amendment to the Special Provisions Act and the Registration of Titles Act, we still have too many persons who cannot obtain titles for property. And then the cost of housing, it breaks my heart when you look at what's happening at NHD and the Youth properties and the cost. NHD is supposed to primarily help persons to be able to afford housing and build affordable housing. And we can't encourage persons to get out of informal settlements when the government body that is charged with developing affordable housing is pricing housing at such an exorbitant cost. So we have got to look back at the housing price as well to make it affordable and to incentivize persons to be able to purchase properties.
Sophia Frazer-Binns, one of the greatest instances of environmental degradation in Jamaica's history has been the rape of our land to mine bauxite. Does the People's National Party not agree that that has to stop, that the returns do not justify, such as they are, which I don't know if you know about, but I don't, whether it's levy or profit share and how much it is. But when we are faced with choices about denuding and craterizing, if I can coin a word, parts of the cockpit country, parts of St. Elizabeth as is now being planned, yes, can any money at all be commensurate to that irretrievable loss of environmental integrity, Sophia Frazer-Binns?
Absolutely not. And, the People's National Party's position is very clear. Certainly, in the last 5 years, we are very, very clear as to what should happen in terms of mining. What is required is a cost-benefit analysis. What is required is for there to be a buffer zone. What is required is no mining in the cockpit country. What is required is that we've got to find alternative to bauxite mining. Listen, we understand that mining has helped. I mean, it's over, I think, maybe 2.5% of our GDP. So it does make a contribution to us financially. We understand the school implication in terms of it builds basic school, the employment implication, the number of persons in communities who are employed. We understand that and we get it. But the fact is, when you look at the total picture, so many persons are impacted negatively. So you have to wonder, is it worth it? And from where we stand in the opposition, the People's National Party's position is that time has come for us to look at alternatives and for us to do a cost-benefit analysis. The implications and the impact as we have seen them at this point, even without a quantitative analysis, far outweighs the financial benefit that we're deriving in the country. And our people, their livelihood, their health are at stake, and we've got to take a second look at that.
Well, I'm very glad to hear that. That's a settled position, a new position. I left a resolution on the table of Parliament asking for that cost-benefit analysis to be done of the bauxite industry,
remember. Yes,
and
yes.
got no support, Sophia. I'm so glad now that we're prepared to do that. And indeed, I'm wondering, even without the formal resources of government, this is something that should be done, should be insisted upon by a political party, a progressive political tendency, the civil society. Otherwise, the bulldozers are going to move in next month or the month after, ma'am.
Absolutely. And,
Yeah.
and part of what we have to do as well is we have to educate, we have to talk with our persons, because I do recall being in St. Anne and I recall being in St. Louis and touring these bauxite communities,
Yeah.
and to hear persons, and there is a real concern they have, because some of them really appreciate the funds that are paid, whether as dust nuisance or as lease for the property. They appreciate it because it's just their economic reality, and I could never downplay that, because it is their livelihood, and I completely understand and appreciate and I sympathize with them. But on the other hand, there's so many, when you hear the parents talk about the children who can't go to school because they're having respiratory challenges, when you see some of the water, because in these areas, you can imagine there's a lot of rainwater harvesting, and you see the water and the water coming out of the tank because of the dust nuisance, and you see some of the plants. I remember being in St. Elizabeth and I saw some plants, and the community persons, and I'm not an agronomist at all, but the community persons will tell me that all of these are impacted by the dust and nuisance in the different communities. And these are some of the things that you really have to stop and think about. And the balance is so important. And the cost-benefit analysis, it cannot be done too soon. You have called for it. I know Senator Bunting has called for it. I have called for it. And I can say unequivocally that the People's National Party's position is that a cost-benefit analysis must be done. Because though we being the PNP, have always been, celebrating and supportive of the bauxite industry. And it is our history. The fact is that with so much more information available and now seeing where we are, we're heading into a cockpit country for mining. Yes. I'm not talking about the boundaries that have been defined in 27 Declaration in Parliament, but the cockpit country as you know it. I'm a girl from St. Anne, and I know the cockpit country is wider than the boundaries that have been defined.
Sure.
And when we start going into the cockpit country, when we start imposing on our maroons, then we have to stop and say, time comes. Is it really worth it? And so the opposition stands prepared to work with the government and any stakeholders who is prepared to have a conversation on the future of the bauxite industry.
Excellent. Glad to hear it. Hope that we will be able to proceed along those lines and bring changes. So, Senator Sophia Frazer-Binns, much obliged to you. Thank you for your time today.
And thank you so much for having me.
Shadow Minister of Land, Environment and Climate Change, broadcasting to the diaspora, Senator Sophia Frazer-Binns. Soon come, there's much, much more. This is the Public Eye and the Open Mind. Crossing the Bridge.